Today we're going to continue with Kant and hopefully make it more interesting, because some of the things we talked about last time can be applied to his metaphysics and ethics, more fun area than just pure epistemology. At first, let's review what have we learned last time for the exam and in general in order for us to continue. First of all, who was the philosopher that awoke Kant from his dogmatic slumber? Remember, he said that prior to his critical philosophy stage, he was in dogmatic slumber, but someone has helped him to wake up. Who was it? Yeah. Hume. Which is not surprising. For one thing, it says so right on the next line here. But the other thing, that's the philosopher we covered right before, and there is a reason why we did so. Hume. David Hume. What did Hume argue ethical judgments are based on? That's one of the things which actually woke him up. It's not the entire thing, because there's a lot of other stuff. Remember his ideas about the self and so on. But more specifically, ethical judgments. Yes?
Sentiments or feelings.
Feelings, exactly. So if it was on the exam, that's the correct answer here, on feelings. Ethical judgments, he says, are not based on reason. They are based on feelings and feelings alone. Reason is nothing but a slave to our feelings. Whatever we feel, reason conveniently will confirm, but not the other way around. At least that's what Hume thought. What kind of change in view that took place in history did Kant compare his philosophy to?
Revolution.
Copernican revolution, Copernican term. Why? Remember, Copernicus said that instead of thinking that the Earth is at the center and Sun that revolves around the Earth, how about we place the Sun at the center? Similar change is what Kant proposes. The question here is how our mind relates to objects. And the emphasis traditionally is placed on the object. The object is there, it is real, and there is some sort of a visual, sensual feed we get from that object. So we are trying to have our mind conform to the object. Our mind adjusts itself so that it would correspond to the object. Kant said, how about we look at it in a different way? He didn't dismiss completely the fact that there are real objects and that we do have some sort of visual and sensual feed from them. But he said, how about we understand that our mind also contributes something to the object, kind of imprints itself on the object, and then objects conform to our mind. Just like in this cookie press example, we get the dough, but the mind presses it into certain cookies. And we would not have cookies unless the mind did that. But once the mind does that, we no longer have reality exactly as it is in itself. Remember, the thing in itself, the object in itself, is something we cannot know because we are not equipped for that. So that's the most important idea there. And then he talks about different judgments and kinds of knowledge. So what kinds of judgments and what kinds of knowledge Kant distinguishes? There's, by the way, like 3 questions there on the review, and they all based on understanding of this. Yeah.
Like specifically what judgments or how many?
Well, let's start with specifically the types of judgments.
Okay. Is that the quantity, quality? Is that one?
No,
Okay, no.
that's not.
I need that answer.
Analytical judgments and synthetic judgments.
Analytic and synthetic. Remember, there are analytic judgments and there are synthetic. So the idea here is, For analytic, we don't have to go outside of the concept in order to understand it. For synthetic, we have to combine two concepts, synthesize them. So, for example, all bachelors are unmarried, analytic. We already know what bachelor means unmarried. We don't need anything else. All bachelors are 6 feet tall. That is synthetic. You have to look at the bachelors, you have to look at the being 6 feet tall, combine it, synthesize it, and then you may or may not get correct answer. Also, knowledge can be of two types. Remember, that's another thing. So knowledge can be what?
It's not the a priori and the posterior, so past and then
Exactly. A priori, a posteriori. A priori means prior to experience. So actually all the analytic ones are a priori. Analytic is always a priori. All bachelors are unmarried. That would be analytic a priori because you don't need to do any experiments to find that out. But synthetic, he says, can be usually think about a posteriori. Like all the bachelors are 6 feet tall. That's an example of a posteriori because you need some post-experience result. First you measure them. Then you know whether they're 6 feet tall or not. You cannot do it in your head. Your head is not going to answer you because bachelors may or may not be 6 feet tall, and the only way to find out is from experience. But he says there is also a priori synthetic, and math is an example of that. But we can synthesize concepts in our head because that is the rules according to which our mind operates. And he actually said that this is the most interesting type, synthetic a priori. And remember, you cannot have analytic a posteriori, that's impossible. So there's just 3 kinds. Analytic a priori, that's like the bachelor's and married. Synthetic could be a posteriori or a priori. Most of them are a posteriori. This is like bachelors are 6 feet tall. But a priori would be math, like 2 + 2 = 4. You don't need any experience to do math. You can do entire math in your head. But it gives you extra knowledge. When a mathematician does this complicated proof, lots of these calculations, he gets something new. He gets new knowledge. Where does he get it from? His head. That's it. He's not going outside his head. So this is also why causality is like this. The causality, cause and effect, is just the rule of our mind. That is why for us it's always necessary. That necessity which Hume thought we cannot find, he says we can find it. It's in our head. For us, everything is cause and effect. That's how we understand the reality. And then also he mentions 2 forms of intuition, which are what? How do we intuit things? Yeah.
Space and time.
Space and time, exactly. So space and time. Again, those are forms of our mind. They are not of forms of objects in themselves. So objects in themselves have any space dimensions, and how many we don't know. We similarly don't know if they exist in time or not, and what dimension of time. Then finally the question here is, what according to Kant are objects we find within experience, product of what process? So the answer is product of synthesizing activity of the mind. Synthesis. The mind constantly synthesizes them. Remember we talked about it as football game or music playing. What mind does is, first of all, collects information through time, combines it under one concept. Like the football game. How do you know what you're watching is a football game? If all you have is just one picture in your mind of people running around wearing these uniforms, You wouldn't understand what the hell is going on. It's just some weird stuff. But you actually combine it with your knowledge of the past, with your understanding of the rules, and all this other stuff. And for this reason, you actually know what's happening. You know what you're doing there, you know what other people are doing there, and so on. And this is what our mind does. And objects themselves are like this too. How do we know this is a table? Like again, if you take some sort of prehistoric person, somehow transport him into our time, he'd be completely lost. He wouldn't know what all these things are. We do. But not only that, the baby doesn't know what things are. When the baby sees a table, it just sees a flash of some sort of color. It doesn't know it's a table. In fact, everything is just like that. It's only later when your mind learns to do all this stuff using the rules, the better it does it, the more it learns about reality. Okay, so where all this stuff takes us then. So phenomena and noumena. He says that this is phenomenal world. This is the world physics studies. Phenomenal world is our normal world, the way we see the world all the time. And that world follows the strict laws of physics. It has causality. Every cause has effect. It has certain space, 3 dimensions of space. It has time, 1 dimension of time. Also, it has some sort of personhood, the I here, which is what Descartes has found. I, myself, am existing in time, just like all of you guys. We exist in time. We are not timeless. But this is not the entire picture. There is also noumena, the nominal world. Nous, remember, in Greek means mind. So that is kind of tells us a little bit what it is. Noumena. So this is phenomena, this is noumena. Noumena is a lot more interesting to us. This is things in themselves, the way things really are. And they are not in space, not in time, not connected by cause and effect. What does it even mean? Well, it's hard for us to really understand it, because we can only understand using this. But we can have some sort of an idea about it, notion of some sort, right? So he calls it a limiting concept, because he constantly keeps on saying that we cannot cross this line. We cannot cross it. This line for us is very, very hard to cross. But nonetheless, we can at least speculate about it. We can try to figure that out. He says that reason by itself constantly tries to do it. It's a third faculty of the mind in addition to sensation and understanding. Reason produces its own concepts, which, unlike the concepts of understanding, refer to transcendence, something which transcends the possible experience. The problem which we all have is that pure reason falls into the trap of applying this here, specifically the causality. Because one of the things which we talk about, which is here, for example, is God. Right? But God is not here, God is there. Therefore, when we try to talk about God using causality and try to prove the existence of God, saying God created the world because the world must have a cause, we already are confused. This is illusions. He calls it irresistible illusion. The other thing which actually is here is the true self. He calls it transcendental ego. Ego in Greek actually means I. It's the same thing as I, but in Greek. And the cosmos, the entire universe. Those are some of the things which we try to talk about them, but we can't, because our mind is not cut out to do that. So starting with the self, the elusive self, we have the notion that behind passing flow of all these experiences, we have is something real, right? We all have this feeling. There's something inside me which is like that real me. But what is this real me? What is this entity which stands behind all our experiences, our feelings, the real self? What exactly is it? So it's not a substance as Descartes thought. The substance is here. That's another one of categories our mind needs to understand reality. And that is not something you can just apply to a true self. The true self is transcendental ego or transcendental unity of apperception. The place where your apperception of the world comes together. It is necessary for us to understand the world because we could not understand the world if we didn't have that. Transcendental ego, a transcendental unity of perception, is the ultimate subject that underlies all experience and also is beyond experience because it really is here and this part is beyond experience. It is part of unknowable noumena. Kant refers to it as X, undefinable variable. We can study empirical stuff. This is what psychology does. Psychology studies this I. How does psychology study it? Many of you guys are psychology majors, so tell me, what do you do? What does psychology do? How does psychology study the I of a human being? What does psychology do in general? If you are a psychology major, what are you doing?
You study the mind, behaviors.
Behaviors, exactly, right? So basically you observe other people's behavior, you put experiments with it, like in psychology they have a lot of experiments when they have some sort of a control group, they have a number of people, they get them to do certain things and they see how do they do it, and then they make some conclusions about it. I took Psychology 101. I didn't go any deeper, but 101 was pretty cool. I still remember this, the prison experiment when they put people and divided into two groups. One group was like prisoners, the other group was treating them like guards, and then very quickly got the joy of it and started really treating them like they are pieces of you know what. So that actually is one of the most interesting experiments. And there are many others. But note that in every single time, that is based on this, right? The cause and effect. You put people in a certain situation, how do they react? How do people react to whatever happening around them? But that doesn't tell us anything about the real self. It doesn't even go there. Because all of this is within space, time, and causality. It is all within the normal kind of framework of what we can learn. So, for example, we can learn that if we pick somebody with a pin, they will say, ouch, right? And so on. But that is, what does it tell us anything about the real person? Like if it was not a real person, but some sort of a robot, wouldn't it be the same thing? You can easily train robot to say ouch every time somebody sticks a pin in it. What would be the difference now? The robot doesn't feel any pain. The robot doesn't even know what's going on. It's just trained every time somebody sticks a pin to say ouch. And it can do it. It's just not going to be the same thing as what happens with us, because we really do feel the pain and it's not fun for us. And then that's why we say ouch. Not because you're supposed to say ouch every time somebody does something. So that is the difference with the real self. Each one of us probably has this feeling that there is something real out there, which is not just this automatic reaction to whatever stimulants we have in environment. Kant is trying to help to understand it. Similarly, the cosmos, the entire world, the totality of the world is here. it is not something we can think about using our reason and using our understanding, rather. Reason tries to think about it. Understanding cannot. Causality, space-time. Now, even with physics, we're starting to understand it a little bit better. Because the string theory, remember, which tells us that there are more dimensions of space, more dimensions of time, and the Big Bang itself. And once you start thinking about it, you will see his point. But he actually uses what he called antinomies of reason to explain what is happening here. And this is something which will help us with Hegel too. What are antinomies of reason? Antinomy is basically the type of contradiction when you can have two statements, both of them making sense, contradict each other. Here's the ones he was concentrating on, these four. First of all, the world has beginning in time and limited in space. Second, the world has no beginning in time and infinite in time and space. And he says both of them make sense. If you think about it, they do. Why does it make sense to say the world has a beginning in time and in space? Does it make sense to you? Like, how could it not? How could it not have beginning in time and in space? Also, limits. And this is what the Big Bang, again, theory tells us, right? The Big Bang theory tells us that the world started at some point. We have this, the Big Bang, that's like several billion years ago, right? This is when the world started, and also it tells us that it started expanding. So the world actually has certain size, but it continues expanding. The physics actually doesn't know whether it will forever expand or whether it will start contract again and then kind of implode back. But we know it is extending. It's getting bigger and bigger, which also implies that it has some size, right? But let's think about it logically. First of all, how could it have started from one to what was before that? So there's literally nothing, and then suddenly Big Bang happened for no reason whatsoever? Does it make sense to you? Doesn't seem to make any sense. There must have been something before that, right? So you see, that's where we get to 1b. There couldn't have been any beginning. The beginning, there has to be something before the beginning and after. Similarly, the fact that the world has certain sides. What's outside the world? And then what does it mean? Nothing? Like literally nothing? Not even empty space? What is nothing? Can you imagine nothing? Like literally not even empty space, but nothing? What does it mean? And how can it be outside of the world? So you fly, imagine you're flying on a spacecraft. You're flying, and then you reach that. And then what? Did it disappear or something? What's happening? Well, you bounce of this urge of the world and fly back. Okay, so this is the first two. Second two, everything can be analyzed into basic elements, and nothing can be analyzed into basic elements. Remember, even the Greeks started with that. So that's the first one, says that there actually are these atoms, the smallest particles. Everything is made. But we found the problem with it right away. Because, okay, let's say we have an atom. Can you split it? Yeah. So what are you splitting it into? Elementary particles now. How about this? Can you split that? Yes. You split that. Then finally you get to the stream. Can you split the stream? Well, we don't know, but if it has any size, you should be able to split it, right? And if it has no size, then it doesn't exist. So you see, again, we hit the problem that nothing can be analyzed into basic elements. It seems like this is a phantom of our mind. The third one, some events are free and undetermined, and there is no freedom. So for one thing, starting with freedom, doesn't it seem to you that we are free to do things a certain way and do them some other way? Like, I don't know about you, but you can really feel like right now I can throw this bottle on the floor or not throw it on the floor, and I am deciding. I can decide either way. I certainly can do either one of the two. And I can do many other things, which I'm not going to do, but we all know that human beings are capable of like almost anything, and sometimes human beings do things which make no sense whatsoever. Like all these mass shootings. To me, this is like beyond me. I don't understand. Why would people take a gun and start killing other people? That doesn't make any sense. But they do, right? And quite a few of them. It's like almost monthly occurrence. Okay, so it seems like there couldn't be any freedom if everything is cause and effect. Every event should have a cause, including your actions. And it also seems like there is freedom because we kind of know what we are free to do and not to do certain things. And finally, necessary being, God. There is necessary being in the world, and there is no necessary being. Again, both of it seems to make sense. On one hand, how can there not be necessary being of some sort of God? It seems like God is necessary indeed. But at the same time, how could there be necessary being? How could there be God? So, what is the answer here? First of all, what is going on? Why do we have these completely opposite statements which both kind of make sense? Well, first thing Kant would say, we are starting to think about this. And when we think about this, what happens is our mind is not made for it. It's like, you know, if you take a computer running Windows 95 or something and try to run a modern application on it, what would you get? Error message. Can't do it. Same thing happens with our mind. It's too primitive. It's not made to understand these things. And when it tries to understand it, our mind also tells us, error. Can't do it. You're not made for that. So his personal answer is kind of like this. He says that the first statement in each pair is the example of dogmatism, and the second statement is also dogmatism, but empirical dogmatism. So the first one, dogmatic rationalism. Second one, dogmatic empiricism. Dogmatic rationalist makes claims about the noumena. Tries to make claims about this when in fact we can't. Dogmatic empiricist, on the other hand, tries to reduce everything to this, to what science tells us, our experience tells us. Which again is a mistake, because clearly there are things our mind and our scientific discovery simply does not explain to us. His resolution for 1 and 2, they are both false. Both options are false. So remember the 1 and 2, first one would be that the universe has a beginning and it has no beginning, and it has size and it doesn't have size. So he says both of it is false. And similarly with the smallest particle, that there is smallest particle, there is no smallest particle, both of these are also false. It is result of us trying to think of the world itself as some sort of totality, which is what our mind used to doing. But we really can't. The world is a lot more complex, and we can't think about it as having space, time, and causality. The world in itself is not like that. Now the 3 and 4 on the other hand are both true. So let's go back to 3 and 4. 3 is events are free and undetermined, and in the same time there is no freedom. He says, yes, they are free here. That is free. Because this is outside causality. And they are following necessity here. But since I am both here and here, I am truly free. And in the same time, once I am in this world, I obey the laws of this world because I'm one of the entities in the physical world. And similarly with God. Like if you start thinking about God using phenomena, of course, you are not going to get the correct answers, but God is here. He places God into this noumena which we cannot know. So basically saying God exists, but we just can't understand God. We can't think about God using our usual concepts. Kant says that the first, well, we already saw that. So this is the quote, why he also helps to understand God and freedom as necessary. He says, if there is no original being different from the world, if the world is without a beginning, also without an author, if our will is not free and our soul is of the same divisibility and corruptibility as matter, then moral ideas and principles lose all validity, and they collapse along with transcendental ideas that constitute their theoretical support. So basically what he's saying is, if you dismiss this side, and if you base everything just on what science tells us, there's no morality. Then really, like, everyone for themselves. Lying, cheating, stealing, as long as you can get away with it, that's fine. Not only that, but you can't blame anybody for anything, because everything is causally determined. The murderer murders because physics in his brain is such that he could not murder. Well, of course you can put him in jail, but don't blame him. And that is, of course, not how we live our life, and certainly not how we should live our life. So God also is neither provable nor disprovable. He goes through all these arguments we already saw, right? Ontological argument, cosmological, and teleological. Remember, ontological argument was that we have a concept of God. God is the greatest thing. Since the God is the greatest thing which also exists is greater than the God greatest thing which doesn't exist, therefore God must exist by definition. And Kant says no. That here he agrees with Hume. He says, well, the existence is not a type of a perfection. The existence is a property which not even a property, it is something we will only find out from experience. And so you cannot even apply that to God whatsoever. The concept of God does include the concept of necessary being. But in order to know whether God actually exists, you cannot simply apply the concept. It doesn't follow from the concept. It is a conditional, the type of condition, right? It tells you if there is God, then there is a necessary being which exists. But it doesn't tell you that there is God. So, in order to apply the concept, you have to figure out first whether something exists. You cannot just start from the concept and say, concept itself tells us that entity exists. Existence is not a predicate. It is not like being red, right? Something can be red and hot, but existence is not the same thing. Red and hot things still may exist or not exist, and it's not something you add to it. Okay, now the argument from design, the teleological argument, he actually thinks it is the best. Here's the quote. He says, "It is oldest, clearest, and most accordant with common reason of mankind." Remember, that is the argument when they tell that the world seems to have a purpose and also great degree of organization, and everything goes towards this purpose. So it does make sense in the sense that indeed thinking that the whole thing is absolutely randomly happened, right? We got just a bunch of stones, bunch of sand, and then somehow life appeared, and that life started getting more and more sophisticated, and eventually human beings appeared, and the whole thing is just completely like random, accidental. That doesn't seem to make sense. It seems like it is some sort of a process which is striving towards something. But, he says, what does it prove to us really? It can at best prove to us that there is an architect of the world, but not a creator, right? So we can't say that God created the world, but it does seem like there is some entity which kind of shaped the world the way it is today. So that's at best what we can say. An architect, right? An architect doesn't himself create stones and other wood, whatever the building is made of, but it just organizes it into a building. So that's the most he allows for us to gain from those arguments. Yes.
Does that kind of fit into like deism?
Well, deism seems to be like the opposite, right? Deism says that the world created, God created the world, but doesn't interfere with it anymore. Here we are not even talking about God creating the world. We are talking about God basically shaping the world. So like, let's say there was a pile of stuff, and God started doing something with the stuff, so it would form into the world the way it is today. That's more or less what Kant suggests. So overall, we cannot, he says, confirm or deny the existence of God. None of these arguments, it's simply because, again, reason, understanding, cannot really tell us very much about these things. They can at best be indicators that there is something there. But they cannot demonstrate to us, they cannot prove to us the existence of God. So the whole idea of proving the existence of God is completely futile. But, he says, those are important concepts. So self, cosmos, and God, these three are what he calls regulative concepts. Why? We need them. First of all, we need the concept of the self. Right? You need to presume at least that you are some sort of real entity which has real freedom and real choice in this life. Even if you can have proof of it, but you have to live this way. Otherwise, how can you even live? Can you live thinking I'm a robot which always does whatever my desires lead me to do? It seems like self-defeating. Same thing also he says about the cosmos overall, that there is a universe out there that's not just a phantom of our imagination, there is some real world. And God, he says God is necessary too, because this is what helps us to, first of all, achieve some sort of moral goodness. And really, like, live better life because of that. So to him, even though we can prove the existence of God, but we must believe it. He thinks that this is, he calls it regulative concepts of reason. You can think about it also this way. Suppose that you have lines going in a certain direction, right, like this. But then there is some sort of barrier which prevents you from knowing where do they lead. Well, can you mentally project and think, okay, this line seems to be going here, this line seems to be going here, this line seems to be going here. So there is some sort of point when they interact. So that's what these concepts are, right? Even though we cannot penetrate this barrier, we cannot know for sure that there's God, real self, and cosmos, but it seems like things pointing us in this direction. Now, to his ethics. He actually was a very influential. In fact, he wrote two more critiques. The first critique, what we talked about right now, critique of pure reason. Then he wrote two additional ones, critique of practical reason and then critique of judgment. So critique of practical reason, together with the foundations of the metaphysics of morals, talks about morality, ethics, how we should behave in life, and that's why he calls it practical reason, like practical application of all this. What does it mean for us on a daily basis? How, based on all this, should we live our life? Because that's the most important question. All of this is abstraction, right? But how you're going to live your life, that is reality. That is the important question. So, what did he think? First of all, he completely disagreed with Hume. He's saying that he is doing another Copernican revolution here. Another Copernican revolution in ethics, just like he did in theory, in epistemology. Since the moral principles cannot be derived from experience, and here he agrees with Hume, you cannot just observe the murder scene and somehow from the murder scene figure out that you should not kill. But you can go the other way around and use rational principles to apply them to experience. You have rational principles already in you. Derive based on those rational principles how you should live. what type of life you should lead. That's also this synthetic a priori, right? Why is it a priori? We're starting from ourselves in our mind. We don't do it based on experience. It's not like I see other people being murdered, and based on that I understand that murdering is not fun. I can decide for myself what I should and should not do just based on my own experience with my own self. And here he says, first of all, the most important thing is the goodwill. It's not the consequences of your actions, it's the intent which matters. Nothing in the world can possibly be conceived which could be called good without qualifications except goodwill. Goodwill. Why are you doing something? What is the motivation behind it? What makes a person's will morally good is that it is moved on the basis of moral duty. And his type of ethics is called deontology. Deon, Greek, means duty. Duty-based ethics. So first start by discovering what is a morally right or wrong type of action, and based on this, do it. Duty-based morality. So deontology, deontological ethics based on duty. In contrast to teleological ethics, which is based on the outcome or the goal, here you're not worried about the outcome, you're worried about, first of all, why you're doing something. Let's look at some examples so we could understand it a little bit better. Let's say a girl, Heidi, is walking one day and she sees the child drowning. Now, if she recognizes the call of moral duty to save the child, it doesn't even matter whether she will save the child in the end. Right? That's the most important thing. What is she doing and why? Like, obviously, if she doesn't even try to save the child, that's not moral behavior. But what is your duty in this case? To save the child. Let's say you try to save the child, but the child still drowned. Should you be praiseworthy? Kant says yes, of course. Because what was important is that you had the right motive. You felt like you need to save the child, and even though you failed, that still is well praiseworthy. Let's look at it the other way. Let's say your motive was wrong, but you saved the child. Would then that be moral action? Why would your motive be wrong? Well, let's say you are running for the mayor and you thought to yourself, if I save the child and it gets into the media, I'll get more votes. So then you jump in and save this child. Is that moral?
No.
No. You see, so that would be consequentialism, based on consequence. You saved the child. Who cares why? No. Kant says then it is not a moral behavior. It's not the result which matters, it's your motivation which matters. So the consequence itself doesn't really matter. He also disagrees with Hume. He says that actually feelings don't matter either. Why? Well, let's say feeling the child is crying so much and that just annoys you so much that you go ahead and save the damn child just so it would stop yelling. Would that be praiseworthy? Would that be a moral behavior? No, it seems like it will not, right? Again, your motive would be the wrong motive. You're basing it on your feelings rather than on the reason. So the why exactly you're doing it is the most important thing. If your feeling may lead you astray very easily. You cannot... So you only need, according to Kant, use the reason and rational principle. But how can you do it? Can you actually find a moral, rational principle? And Kant thinks you can. He will be criticized by Hegel. Hegel actually rejects his entire approach too. Nonetheless, it is interesting because it gives us some guidance. And the guidance he gives is actually not bad. So he says the moral law is a rule guiding our behavior, and that should come in the form of imperative. imperative. You can have hypothetical imperative and categorical imperative. What does it mean, hypothetical imperative? If you want X, do Y. But that is a little vague, right? Because that can cover almost anything. You can say, if you want to poison somebody, then use strong poison. Categorical imperative, however, is not like this. It actually tells you do X. It tells you what you should do. And that's what Kant decided should be the guiding principle, the categorical imperative. How did he formulate it? He actually had 3 different formulations. This is the first formulation of his categorical imperative. It says, act only according to that maxim by which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. So this is how you can approach, he says, any action. If you want to do something, ask yourself, do I want everybody to do it? So for example, if the child is drowning, do I want everybody to save the child? And it seems like the answer is yes, right? You want everybody who's at least capable to save the child. Let's say you want to steal something. Again, he says, ask yourself, do I want it to be universal law? Do I want people to just steal other people's stuff? And if you think about it, he thinks that there's no way you would answer yes. Because maybe it's fun for you to steal, but it certainly is not fun when somebody else steals from you. So if that's the case, he says, don't do it. That's very simple. Similarly, murdering other people. Well, do you want to be murdered? Probably not. Do you want it to be universal law? No. So don't do that. And that is, according to him, based purely on reason. Your reason tells you that this specific action, you don't want it to be performed by other people. But he actually makes it into a logical category. He says, what you're doing then, if you do it, is a contradiction. If you don't want people to steal, but you're stealing, you're contradicting yourself. Right? On one hand, you are saying stealing is okay. On the other hand, you are saying stealing is not okay. It's a contradiction. So stealing is okay for me, but it's not okay when other people do it. Which is why he, not even basing it on experience, on what, like, I don't want to be killed, therefore I do not kill. But he basing it on reason that if you actually want everybody to follow the same rule, including yourself, you cannot make exceptions from this rule. You have to follow it yourself. Yeah, so that would be the logical contradiction or inconsistency. If on one hand you're thinking that killing is okay for me, but on the other hand it's not okay for others. Stealing is okay for me, but it's not okay for others. Another way to approach exactly the same categorical imperative is this. You say, act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of another, always as an end and never as means only. So understand that other people are just like you and treat them as an end and not as means. What would it mean to treat them as means? Treat them like furniture, basically, right? Try to achieve your own goals through them. And the book actually brings a good example. It says, well, what about, let's say you go to a grocery store and the cashier. Seems like cashier is there as means for you to just pay for your groceries, right? But you say, no, but there's still a difference how you treat the cashier. Are you treat them like they are a piece of furniture, or are you treat them like a human being? And you have to always understand that they are human beings, just like you. They are not like part of the inventory in the store. So that's another way of understanding exactly the same principle. Because obviously the most important question in morality is how we treat other people. And perhaps other animals, right? We don't care about how we treat tables or something. That's not a question of morality. If you break in tables, well, you may be stupid because you're going to need to eat on something, but it's not a moral question. It's a different question. However, how you treat other people and animals, that is the question of morality. And here you should treat them as an end, because you also should understand, just like you, they are this Noumena. They are not just pieces of furniture. They're not like stones and tables. They are themselves unique individuals who have the self, this transcendental self within them. And for this reason, you should treat them accordingly. So, principle of autonomy. Central to the autonomy of the will is freedom. And that's why we should always remember that freedom is real. We should always understand that each one of us is indeed free to do things either way we want. But we should, through reason, make sure that we do them in a correct way. How? Well, that's the principle, right? Treat others as ends and not as means. And also think of it as, I am making this universal law. I am in charge of this universal law. I myself decide how the world should function. Should people steal from each other or not? If I think they should not, start with yourself. Should they kill each other or not? If you think they should not, start with yourself. And 3 postulates of morality, which he says are necessary for us, even though we cannot prove them. One of them is human freedom. Yeah, he says it's necessary. We cannot get rid of it. If we stop believing in human freedom, we can't function and others can't function. But the other one, interestingly enough, he says immortality. Immortality, he says, is necessary. Why is immortality necessary for a human being to believe in? Well, for one thing, he says, we should understand that obviously in one life you can be very unhappy, or even if you are doing all the right things. So, according to Kant, it's necessary to believe that there will be another life, and another life, and another life. So you have time to work on yourself. You have time to improve yourself, and eventually to indeed achieve moral goodness, even if you couldn't do it in your own life. And finally, God. He thinks God is necessary for us to believe in, because the distribution of happiness may not happen in our life, but if we believe in God, we know that at some point we will be made responsible for the evil we did and also rewarded for the good things we did. So according to him, those are the 3 things we must believe in, and they are necessary concepts in our life, necessary principles. And if we don't believe in them, then we will go astray. And it's not just going to affect us personally. It's going to affect each one around us, the entire society. So overall, of course, as you can see, he still is trying to achieve the same thing as the previous philosophers, right? He's trying to reconcile science and belief in God, science and religion. Do you think he was successful? He does it in a much more sophisticated way than the ones before him. But was he successful? Did it solve the problem? Are you convinced? Are you going to be moral now and believe in God? Especially for those who didn't believe in God before this lecture. Did I convince you? Or rather, Kant. Did Kant convince you? Well, obviously it's not that easy to convince people, because remember, again, everyone already has certain moral values based on what? On their own experience, on their own life, and I don't think there's anything I can tell you guys which would change that. But hopefully it is at least kind of makes you rethink certain things, right? Look at them a little bit differently. So when we go into Hegel, Hegel will be very important in order to understand Marx. And Marx everybody talks about, but very few people read Marx, and very few people understand him. So we will see how Marx, first of all, Hegel based his philosophy on Kant. He lived, they overlapped, he is younger. And then Marx will be based completely on Hegel. So from now on, everybody, starting from Descartes, is really kind of connected to the previous philosopher.